Well, thank you, Paige, and to our audience, thank you for joining us today. You didn't ask for it, but you're on a journey to the future. Those of you who are board members or managers are tasked with leading your association safely and successfully to the future. And for you homeowners, we want to equip you to know more about the journey ahead so you can support your board and management in this journey and be better prepared for a future board member role yourself. And that's because every year, every association leader asks the question, what do I do now to take care of the association? And that's the purpose of today's program, helping you prepare for the journey ahead to make sure you arrive safely and successfully. Well, here in 2024, your job as an association leader is challenging. Started with the upheaval over COVID-19 back in 2020, and then our industry faced the shock of the tragic collapse of Champlain Tower South in 2021. We learned that the cost of 98 lives that deferred maintenance creates or magnifies building safety issues. The consequence of not caring for a building became much bigger than just unsettling special assessment. And in addition to safety concerns, we're emerging from a period of high inflation that disrupted budgets all across the country. Now, we may be past the high inflation phase, but those much higher prices remain. And scarcity creates tension. And that's exactly where we are right now, with associations, again, all across the country, finding themselves underprepared financially for upcoming reserve projects. So a good roadmap and good preparation for the journey ahead is even more important. We've moved forward from the simple awareness that reserves are good to have, maybe something that we'll have someday, to reserves are now important to have, understanding the connection of reserve cash to avoiding unfair and unsettling special assessments, all the way to reserves are critical to the future of the association, so repair and replacement projects can be done on time to minimize costly and dangerous deterioration to your facilities. Now, our strategy for today to help you make better daily, weekly reserve decisions is to start out with a big picture perspective. Now, we do this to give you the tools so you can execute a successful reserve strategy for your association throughout the year. As Coley and I walk you through today's material, we'll periodically ask you to raise your hand to let us know if you're staying on track. So let's practice. Grab your mouse and click the hands raised icon in your control panel, similar to the one you see on screen, if you're ready for us to get going on today's presentation. So give me a click on your hands raised. Okay, I'm seeing hands go up. Okay, we'll call that good enough, and we'll start the program. This is our roadmap for today's presentation, starting with a little introductory time to brush up your basic reserve funding and spending principles. So, Coley, start us off with perhaps the most important concept we have to share, the purpose of reserve funding.
Why, thank you, Robert. It's great to be joining you in this program. I couldn't agree more that having the right tools and strategy is going to set you up for a successful journey to the future. So let's start at the top. Think for yourself. How do you describe the purpose of reserve funding? For the here and now or for future projects? Think about it for just a moment. Reserve funding is for the present. Reserve funding is not for the future, for a slush fund, or for a rainy day. Reserve funding offsets the daily, weekly, monthly, and ongoing deterioration of the common areas at the association. Just like your monthly power bill pays for the electricity you use during the month, reserve funding pays for the deterioration that occurred during the month. While the expenses themselves are scattered irregularly over the years, reserve funding offsets the steady, ongoing cost of deterioration, which is as real as any other bill the association faces. When every owner pays their fair share of what they are enjoying and using up, the future takes care of itself. That's a fundamental concept we need you to understand right here at the start. You're going to have a lot more success with your reserves when you always talk about funding in the present tense. Every owner's responsibility to offset deterioration during the time they own a home in the association. They're not setting funds aside for the future. As we go on this journey to the future, we're bound by the 4 reserve rule. Deterioration and the resulting repair and replace costs are inevitable. Ignoring the cost of deterioration doesn't make it go away, and it's the board who is responsible to protect, maintain, and enhance the common areas of the association. If the board delays, a project and deferred maintenance sets in. Those same projects will only get more expensive. And finally, homeowners always get stuck paying the bills, and those delays only end up costing them more money. Remember to keep the board focused on the target. It is their job to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association, running the association in a financially sound and sustainable manner. That means no guessing. The goal is to have collected enough funds along the way to perform your reserve projects in a timely manner. Guessing or ignoring the reality of reserve deterioration isn't going to get you successfully to the future. Besides, it's the board's responsibility to provide for those projects to get accomplished. So today, we're going to lay out a roadmap with your key talking points and decision points.
Well, thank you, Coley. I want to lay a little groundwork here for board decision making. Boards need to know how to safely make decisions. To minimize board liability risk, if their decisions are ever second-guessed, those decisions need to be made based on the 3 elements of the business judgment rule. Boards will enjoy protection from litigation if meeting minutes demonstrate that they acted with a duty of care or good faith, which means making quality decisions, a duty of loyalty, which means putting the interests of the association above their own personal interests as a homeowner, and a duty of inquiry, means reaching out for information when they don't know the answer. Just like Coley said, no guessing. Reach out and ask when you have a question. And that's where we fit in with a reserve study, recommending a reserve funding plan to offset ongoing deterioration. And that's how we help you answer the question, what do I do now? So, Coley, what are some good talking points as we fill in this blank page that we can share with our audience when asked why an association should get or refer to their reserve study?
Yes, thank you, Robert. First, an updated reserve study identifies future expenses and helps the association avoid surprises. It also reduces costs by preparing the association to do their projects on time. It minimizes special assessments because the cash is there when the community needs it. It reduces the liability that boards would have if they were simply guessing. It also maximizes property values due to maintaining curb appeal and keeps the association in compliance with state laws. And finally, one more thing, there's the intangible benefit of keeping the owners informed, communicating with them so every owner understands where their monthly assessments go, because we all know they're always wondering where those monies are going. On the other hand, the consequences of going without a reserve study is regular surprises, increased expenses, especially in an inflationary environment, we'll touch on that later, and higher board liability exposure, and the Ds, which are often things like the following: disappointment in how the property looks, discouragement when the association has no money to do what it needs to do, dysfunction and board inaction leading to homeowners' discontent, that's another D, and frustration, deterioration because there's no money or no action, declining home values or curb appeal, rumors of a special assessment. That leads to distrust, owners aware that the board is not taking care of the property, and danger when deferred maintenance accumulates.
Well, thanks, Coley. That's a great refresher of the big picture concepts. Now let's move ahead to talk about the application of these roadmap principles. In this section of application, we'll completely skip talking about laws in the 25 or so states that guide reserve studies or reserve disclosures. That's because an association does not need reserve planning because of the law. Associations need reserve planning to offset ongoing deterioration that's driven by Mother Nature and Father Time. So prepare well for the deterioration at your association, and legal compliance follows. So let's turn the corner. Let's talk about boards here. The managers are the agent for the board, but it's the board who makes the decisions. So as a PCAM co-lead, how do the managers with us today effectively encourage or coach the board towards making wise choices?
That's a great question. Well, we all know the theory that boards are responsible to run the association successfully, fairly, and in a financially stable manner. But the reality is they all too often act like their job is to keep assessments low. Give me a quick hands raised if this sounds like your board. Well, when boards are pursuing the fool's gold of keeping assessments low, they're acting selfishly, not acting in the best interest of the association like their business judgment rule duty of loyalty requires. It's important to remind boards repeatedly of their job, help them keep their eye on the ball, and let me give you a new tool. That doing the right thing is actually in their financial best interest. In the next slide, I'll show you how effective reserve planning actually makes money for the association. In our pioneering 2017 study among comparable neighboring associations, what you see on screen is that we found that home prices on a dollar per square foot basis were 12.6% higher in associations with well-funded reserves, meaning those above 70%. This means a strong reserve fund boosts home values. Setting aside enough money each month to care for the association maximizes curb appeal and returns thousands of dollars to each owner in maximized home values. It's what you probably suspected, but now we have proof. So a roadmap for success starts with a strategy of focusing on a simple message of responsibly budgeting to offset ongoing deterioration. And that's a successful strategy that pays off with maximized home values. Now, I'm going to jump right into the next application, the actual reserve study. Words are a powerful tool, and I want to make sure you have the right words to use. First off, I want to make it clear that what we're about to share are not just association reserves, ideas, or concepts. These concepts are straight from the National Reserve Study Standards, which were established way back in 1998 and most recently updated in 2023. Make sure you understand that there are three types of reserve studies: a full study and two update products, a with site visit update and a no site visit update. The reserve studies come in these three types. A full reserve study typically only needs to be done once. That means the vast majority of reserve studies performed in the U.S. are the less expensive with site visit or no site visit updates. Best practice is to perform a with site visit update every third year, with the no site visit updates being done in the in-between years. Remember, update products are less expensive than the first full reserve study engagement.
Thanks, Coley. We're making a lot of great progress here and a lot of application in that last section. Well, now let's get to some actual examples so our audience can make good decisions all through the year. And let's start with one of the most common issues. The question is if a project is a reserve expense or an operating expense.
That's a great question. I get this one all the time. It's probably one of the most asked questions. We cover that question in an entire webinar, our Reserve Studies 101 program, which you can find on our website or our YouTube channel. But let me summarize the answer in the next few slides. Think about it like this. There's a three-part test that every reserve component must pass. That the item is a common area responsibility, that it can be reasonably anticipated, and that its cost is significant to the association. Every component in your reserve study needs to pass this three-part test. But let's check back to the questions you face on a regular basis. How do you know if something is a reserve expense or an operating expense? Here's how it works. First, you look to see if the project is listed in the reserve study. If so, it's a reserve expense. If roof replacement is a line item in the reserve study, Just cleaning the gutters on the roof doesn't make it as a reserve project. That's normal maintenance. Next, consider if the expense affects the component's useful remaining life. That means a minor service call to a boiler is not a reserve project, but replacing the igniter system that extends the boiler's remaining useful life by 5 years, that's a legitimate reserve expense. And finally, if it truly looks like a component was missed or was not knowable at the time of the last reserve study, check with your reserve study provider. They'll help you decide, preventing you from guessing. That's a good example of exercising your duty of inquiry from the business judgment rule. Here's another one. Look at this simple but typical reserve component list. All the normal things are here: description, useful life, remaining useful life, and current cost. Suppose your pool heater fails. You see a pool resurface component. See that second one on the list? But no pool heater component. From what you've just learned, replacing the pool heater, or pool filter for that matter, isn't automatically a reserve expense just because it's related to the pool. Check with your reserve study provider. There may be a reason it was excluded, or they may support the expenditure from reserves and add it to your component list in the next update. It's not in your best interest to guess. Too many properties gradually deplete their reserves by spending those limited funds on non-reserve projects.
And that's a real problem. Associations depleting reserves when they've worked so hard to gather what they do have. Okay, well, that helps properties not deplete the reserves by focusing on what are appropriate reserve expenses. But is there something boards and managers can do to help their properties actually save money?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we just talked about, most of your reserve decisions through the year are going to be spending choices. Hopefully, the funding plan is set at the beginning of the year, at budget season. We want to encourage you to spend reserves on the right projects at the right time. Spending reserves effectively avoids expensive deferred maintenance or even corrective maintenance, which is more costly than deferred maintenance. But not all reserve projects are the same. Projects fail differently. Some are okay to defer. Some you should rely on doing on a schedule. It's okay to defer an inconsequential component when cash is tight. It's okay to stop and not spend reserves and let that asset fail. That might be, say, a machine in the gym that nobody uses, or a water heater in the pool restroom. You can live without it for a little while, but you want to think twice and reevaluate obsolescence projects, doing the ones that have true merit for the association and deferring the not needed now projects. It's the protection and catastrophic projects that you want to make sure you do on time. Those are projects like wood paint and asphalt sealing that protect the underlying and very expensive wood or asphalt, or catastrophic projects like a hot water boiler for the building or an entry gate mechanism. Nobody wants those calls when there's no hot water. Don't delay on those. Those are the ones that will get real expensive or cause hardships if you delay. Stay in the green. Green means go. But just as a reminder, no deferred projects save the association any money. Those projects still need to be done. And you have to be careful deferring only the safe projects, because otherwise you'll just cost the owners a bunch of extra money. Contact your reserve provider if you have a question. This asphalt is a classic example of a poor decision. Here's a protection project, a board that delayed doing their protective asphalt seal coat, and as a consequence, the expensive underlaying driveway failed. Replacing the driveway cost them between 10 and 20 times the original cost of that seal project that they delayed. The same is true for this painting of the ironwork, right? It's all deteriorated and now has to be completely redone. Painting it could have given them additional time over the years. We also look at this when replacing a roof. Delaying protection or catastrophic projects are generally a bad idea. Unless you reached out to an expert and have been given advice that delaying is in the best case, okay. Everyone with me on this? Understanding that reserve projects are different. Give me a hands raised if you understand that some are okay to delay and some should really be done on time. Do I see any hands?
Yeah, Coley, that's a great point. Not all reserve projects are equal. Some are okay to delay, and some we really want to be doing on time. Okay, well, that's great, articulating those different 5 types of failures. But what about when the project matches, but the cost doesn't? What's someone to do there?
That's a good point. Well, first, just go ahead and do the project. Expect that the extra dollars will either come from other reserve projects or be redistributed to other projects. The asterisk here is to let you know that all this means is that it will automatically update when using the cash flow method. Then make sure your reserve study is updated with new information, making sure your reserve study is better each time it's done. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. Spend reserves. Get that project done and protect your property. Taking care of the property is more important than following your reserve study document. The reserve study is a budget planning tool. Do what needs to be done, and remember the 4 reserve rules. Delayed projects often get expensive, and that just makes things more expensive for the homeowners.
Okay, got that. But is it ever okay to make a project different or to upgrade a component, making it better when it gets replaced? Does that make it a capital improvement? Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Reserves are not for adding new assets to the association, like a new dock when one previously didn't exist, or a new pool when one previously didn't exist. That's the key. But if the asset needs to be replaced, it's totally fine to do a natural upgrade, like you see on the slide. Replacing an incandescent light with another light that uses electricity, like maybe an LED. Just remember, if the asset or project exists is the key distinction. Remember that reserves offset ongoing deterioration of existing assets. Reserves are not a slush fund to be used to buy new things for the association. If your board ever has a question on the issue, once again, reach out to your reserve study provider for clarification. We're here to help.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's now talk about money in reserves and the big question, if the association has enough. Now, like with components, we devote an entire webinar to this issue. It's called Reserve Studies 102, which again, you can find on our website or YouTube.
Yes. So the major point from that webinar is to measure reserve fund size by percent funded, not the cash balance. Champlain Towers South had about $700,000 in its reserve fund. That sounds like a lot of money until you understand that they had so many reserve projects waiting to be done, they were only about 7% funded. Percent funded tells us how well the association meets the needs of the association. Remember that the cost of deterioration is ongoing. Percent funded reveals the result of that funding. If the resulting reserve balance has kept pace with the ongoing deterioration over the years, it's kind of like the world record pace line that you sometimes see in a swim race. It allows you to know how we're doing. It's important to note that you can be well-funded now and have zero funding in a few years if you don't have a good funding plan. In a quick answer to the question about how associations are doing, if they have enough, about 2/3 or 66% of associations have reserves that fit the percent funded definition of being in the fair or strong range. But it's that 1/3 in the weak range that make all the news. This chart shows you why percent funded matters. This chart shows that you can predict most special assessments. You can see them coming in years in advance when you look at percent funded. See how common special assessments are in the red columns on the left side of the chart? When the association is in the 0 to 30% funded range, but special assessments are infrequent in most of the yellow zone and even rare in the green zone. It's pretty powerful information. This is great information for your board to know. Give me a hands raised if you can see how percent funded tells you if your association is prepared or unprepared for the upcoming expenses.
That might be a sobering question for many people here in the webinar today.
Uh-huh.
Well, let me take it one step further. When you've talked about what's in the reserve fund, now people are probably trying to think, well, what's it take to adequately fund reserves and offset ongoing deterioration, being prepared? And the answer is that it's often about 25% of total budget, like we show in this pie chart.
Yes. And why budgeted funding instead of special assessments? With Budgeted funding, every owner pays their fair share of steady, ongoing deterioration over the time they owned a home in the association. The result is that the funds exist when they are needed. And remember, the future takes care of itself when you take care of adequate funding on an ongoing basis. Everybody pays their fair share. This is the magic of how associations avoid unfair special assessments and expensive deferred maintenance, which maximizes their property values. This is all part of your roadmap to success. Choosing your words and discussion points carefully is how curb appeal and property values are maximized. That's a successful strategy. Though some of you are probably distracted thinking your association isn't close to putting 25% of the total budget aside and wondering if that's even possible. But I'll tell you that reserve funding is not too expensive. Even 25% of the total budget often works out to be about the cost of a premium copy per day. That's very affordable. If someone says they can't afford it, they're just plain wrong. Besides, another fact is that budgeted reserve funding is the least expensive way to pay for reserve expenses. The expenses are driven by deterioration, not the budget. The only choice you have is how the owners will pay. With budgeted funding for a, say, $250,000 roof project, owners will pay less than $250,000 due to compound interest earned from a bank. A special assessment will pay for the expense. Well, the special assessment should cover a $200,000 roof, right? No. At current rates, it will take about $320,000 from owners to pay back a $250,000 loan. Like we've said plenty of times before in this webinar, delaying it usually gets expensive.
Okay, I've heard you say in here and what I see in the chart that budgeted funding is going to cost the owners less than a special assessment at the time of the expense, and that is less expensive than a loan. I get that. But can you offer now some help for boards or managers who need to significantly increase their reserve funding? How do they get started on that path to success, even if they are going through budgeted funding? And that seems like just a high ask for them.
Sure. Well, we call it a $10 solution. It likely took the association years or even decades to get into an underfunded jam. Check with your reserve study provider. You usually can take a few years to get out of that jam. Consider raising your reserve funding by $10 per owner per month this year. And then next year, $10 more per owner per month. And the following year. In just 2 to 5 years, that's usually all it takes to make associations raise their funding enough to be at a sustainable level.
Well, that sounds real doable. Thanks for sharing that. Well, we're at the time for a summary of our program today and trying to get to the answer of what's the right thing to do. So how do you have reserve fund success at your association? So Coley, bring it to a close here with some summary advice.
Thanks, Robert. Yes. So during budget season, know what to look for in your reserve study. Know the year that the reserve study was prepared for before they quickly get out of date. Know the type of reserve study. Was it a with site visit update or a no site visit update? Then look for 3 things in that reserve study. The component list to see your reserve projects coming up. Number 2 is an evaluation of the reserve fund strength, which is measured by percent funded. So check that percent funded. And number 3 is your multi-year funding plan. What does it say you should be funding this year? After you've received the reserve study, who do you distribute it to? Or what do you distribute? We recommend the executive summary of our reports should go out to all owners. Very clear for them to see the standing of the association in that report. Leave the complete reserve study for those who specifically request it. And what does success look like? Measure success by the lack of disruptive special assessment, projects getting done on time, and percent funded above 70%. Reserves being spent only on true reserve projects, and the ability to pay your operating fund projects from your operating fund. And here's an inside pro tip about updating. Most associations come back to us in the recommended best practice interval with site visit update every 3 years. And because reserve study information is in a constant state of change, we find that special assessments drop about 30% in the associations where they do a no site visit update in between their with site visit updates. Those boards are keeping their eye on the ball and demonstrating their duty of inquiry and duty of care getting the information they need to make quality decisions to care for their property.
Well, thanks, Coley. It's all part of our goal that you have a good grasp on the physical and financial condition of your property so you can move forward safely and successfully on your journey to the future. And that brings us to the end of our planned content today. Scroll to the bottom of our home page if you want to sign up to be notified of upcoming programs like this one. Our next webinar is Client Inspired. We'll be walking you through some real reserve study scenarios. Maybe you'll be able to see a little bit of your association in one of those profiles. And if you wish Association Reserves to be on your team, click a link at the top of our homepage to request a free, no obligation proposal for your association. And of course, we have some other resources. You've heard us say that we're recording this program for YouTube. And yes, you can see this program and other programs on our website and on our YouTube channel. It's a great resource there. And if you're not a video watcher, a YouTube watcher, we have this great book. It's called Understanding Reserves. It's relatively inexpensive, and we've got a free download of Chapter 1 so you can get a flavor of what it reads like. And I'll make sure I put a link to that in our webinar outline that you'll get in about a week. And then we have this other tool that we think is just a fantastic product for our clients. It's called UPlanet. It's an online reserve calculator. It's user-friendly. All the calculations are per National Reserve Study standards, and it allows a board, after they receive their reserve study from Association Reserves, to actually get their fingers in and start playing with the numbers. And that is an access that they have through the rest of their budget season. Then it times out. But it's a tool that allows a board to test moving some projects around, test different funding plans, starting balance, interest or inflation rates. It allows you to go in and actually make that reserve study your own. And then another tool that we have for associations is a weekly podcast for board members. This is for the about 2 million board members all across the country who carry their associations forward and carry, by extension, the entire industry on their shoulders into the future. It's called HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. It's there to encourage and equip board members, some insights from regular guests, hosts on current topics, guest experts, and once a month we feature an interview with a real-life board hero. And again, you can get that on your favorite podcast platform, HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas, on our YouTube channel, or on the podcast website, which is hoainsights.org. And this time, I'll turn the microphone over to Paige, who will serve as our MC for our Q&A time together.